Well, good evening. It's good to see each of you and glad to be with you, continuing our study in the book of Revelation. Hope that we can finish up chapter 14 tonight. So last time, if you recall, we've worked our way through this kind of step back, let's see the bigger picture. We've been introduced to the dragon, we've seen his connection and the fact that he's the force behind the sea beast, but the sea beast is also using this earth beast. So we have the Roman Empire, and then we have this religious force that was also supporting the authority and the glory of the emperor in the false prophet and the earth beast. And then they ask the question, their followers, who is like him? Who can fight him? And then as with that gauntlet being thrown down before us, then we see Jesus standing on Mount Zion with his 144,000. And that's what we want to talk about tonight as we get into the rest of this. And I think in many ways, this chapter kind of stands as an answer. I mean, the first two chapters that we looked at before this are answers to questions that we observed have been unanswered up until this point. And this is also kind of answering those questions, just like answering that gauntlet that was thrown down by who can withstand him. This also is going in answering some of those questions that maybe are not necessarily stated, but I think if you're thinking about this, then they're going to be either implied or questions that are just kind of naturally occur to a person. All right, so we have the Lord on Mount Zion with these 144,000, and we're introduced to them as John says he hears a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits to God and to the Lamb, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So I mentioned in the Lord's Supper talk the other night, and where I want to go with this as well is, how do we make application to this, to us, from this to us? What lessons are implied by these symbols, the symbolic description of the people here? What applications can we make for ourselves?
It seems to emphasize their purity, that they were not defiled with women, but they were virgins, were redeemed from among men. I was thinking there was something else. I guess I missed it. No deceit, yeah.
Yep, no deceit in their mouth. All right, very good. So the no deceit, the without fault, so their purity, their holiness, anything else jump out at you?
Even though they were not worthy of this to begin with, God has brought them up to this level of purity.
All right, very good. So this is something that definitely has the hand of God in it for us as well. So just noticing a few of these attributes, I numbered them on the previous one, but just attaching some thoughts to those numbers. So first of all, what are they doing? They're singing and they're learning this new song, and they're responding to the sound of harpists. So this is a very joyful, this is a very thankful people, which is amazing considering their situation. So this reminds us of like Paul and Silas being in prison, and what were they doing? At midnight singing songs to God. This is that same kind of people that's being exemplified for us. They're worthy. They have access to the throne, and the four living creatures, the elders, are all kind of responding to this. And also, they're a special people. Nobody could learn this song except for them. So it reminds us of our song that we sing, I heard the song and I strove to join. It's taken from this idea. So this is a special people that is distinct from everyone else. They're saved. So especially put this in contrast to the earth beasts, to those that the mark of the beast that we talked about last time. They're redeemed from the earth. They don't have this fault that we've been talking about. So not defiled with women, they're virgins. Again, this is symbolic of their moral purity, their holiness. It shouldn't read any more into it than that. But that is one of the dangers that people have when they try to take this literally. Then it's only 144,000 going to heaven, and they're only men, and they're only people who've never had any sexual activity before. So that's a pretty tall order, and that limits out a lot of folks. So again, danger of trying to take this literally. But to me, this is one of the most touching scenes in this book, that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. When I think of people that do that, I cannot help but think of children. I mean, when they're like little toddlers, they may get brave enough to kind of venture out from their parents a little bit, but as soon as something scary happens or something, that they come running back to mom and dad, they grab onto mom and dad, and wherever they go, that's where they go. And that's the way these people look at Jesus. Wherever he goes, it doesn't matter. That's where they're safe. That's where they're secure. That's who they trust. And they're going to go wherever he goes, and they don't have to understand anything else. And I think that's often what's missing from the faith of a lot of people. They do too much thinking on their own, and they're too much like that toddler who's feeling a little too confident and wandering away from Jesus. We need to make sure that we're more like the other toddler that's holding on to him and going with him no matter where he goes. Even though something may not make sense to us, we trust him. And so we will follow him no matter what. So a powerful and touching picture, I think. And then also just honest, no deceit in their mouth. This could also be kind of I hate to say the word jab, but a point back to the fact these are people who've not been involved in blasphemy. These are not people who have actually betrayed their God. They have stayed true to their commitment, to their confession. And so when the temptation came, you're going to suffer economic persecution. You may suffer even loss of your life. These people were willing to do that. So the fact that they would not lie against God, I think is also. So then righteous, justified people without fault before the throne of God. So I think a couple of lessons here for us. First of all, there's two parties that this scene depends on. One part of it is the people involved. So as much as depends on us, are we joyful? Are we thankful? Are we pure? Are we holy? Are we loyal? Are we honest and true to our confession? And for the part that depends on God, that depends on Jesus, do we trust him to make us worthy and special and saved, righteous and justified? Do we find the same courage and comfort that these people would have found in this scene, in this vision? So I think this is a powerful lesson, a mirror for us to compare ourselves to these people and say, do we look like them? And if we don't, then what do we need to change so that we do look like them? So one other thought, is this the people in heaven? I don't think it is. It's the 144,000 that we saw back in chapter 7. This is the answer to, and the other reason why I don't think so, is this is the answer to the beast and to his followers. We have on one side the beast, and on the other side we have Jesus. On one side we have the people that wear the mark of the beast and are willing to make compromise, and then we have this 144,000 who are not. These are God's people still on earth. So I stress that to say this is supposed to be what we look like too. So not just, it would be nice if we look like. This is what we need to look like. This is what we have to be constantly striving for. All right. Any other lessons, applications that you take away from these symbols? All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is some proclamations from 3 different angels. We're going to look at 2 other visions also. This part of the book kind of reminds me of what we see in Zechariah, where you have these little small visions that are kind of disjointed from each other. they're not really telling you a narrative in the same way that we've seen throughout the book. This continues this very lengthy interlude like we have seen in a few occasions. So I think there's two big takeaways from this. One is you do have kind of precedence, like I said, for this from Zechariah. But then we need to look at the disjointed parts, the things that are different. What is changing as we go from one vision to the next? And recognize that that's the thing that's being emphasized. So the things that don't fit exactly in kind of a narrative are actually highlighting for us the things that we need to emphasize. And it also allows us to try to connect the dots. If we assume the person who's telling us this story, this book, is sane, rational, wise, then all of these things are put together by design. There is a line that we should be able to draw to connect them. So we need to look for that line. And if we can connect those dots, then that will also help us find the points that we're supposed to see and emphasize. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit more as we go what I think that line is. So continuing, we have this angel. It's another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. Now, I think everlasting gospel, and I have a certain picture in my mind. To every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. All right, universal gospel. Saying with a loud voice, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. I was kind of expecting to see something about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. This is not what I was expecting. So, with that in mind, how does this represent the everlasting gospel? To whom is he directing this?
It's similar in the way that the choice can be boiled down to give glory to God or face his judgment, and it also goes out to all men, none were left out from the opportunity.
All right, very good. Now, if we boil it down that much, how much different is this from the Old Testament gospel, if you will? It's not. This, like whether we're looking at the Old Testament, if we're looking before the Old Testament, the period of the patriarchs, or whether we're looking at the New Testament, it doesn't matter the time or age. The gospel always has two elements. One, we've sinned. We're in trouble. Judgment is coming. That is reality. It's good to know that before that befalls us. But then the really good news is you can change. You can repent. Mercy is available, and so judgment can be avoided. And so that applies in every situation, and it would have special meaning to them. Not just the gospel as we think about it, about the story of Jesus and becoming a Christian, but there was a special judgment that was being dispensed, that was looming over their heads, and they could also avoid that as well. So they did not have to, as Jesus said, they did not have to perish like those that perished in the fall of the Tower of Siloam. So it would be that kind of salvation that we'll be looking at. All right, so warning, God's judgment has come. It's directed toward everybody. This is, again, notice the earth dwellers. So if we're taking the earth as being the realm of the unregenerate, of those who are not saved, then that, again, kind of reinforces that picture. These are the people that are not saved. So they need to fear God, give glory to him, worship him. And again, notice the emphasis on mercy being available. So it's very kind of condensed, but it's a whole lot better than what Jonah gave to the people in Nineveh. And even though that was a gospel of sorts, and so we can see kind of the connection. So if we can see how Jonah's message was actually ultimately good news that led to the repentance of others, then it's even less work to see how this is the gospel. So specifically in this case, those that were facing judgment, destruction of Rome, they did not have to perish in that way. We have mercy being extended to the individuals of the empire. All right. So another angel follows. So we have this one message, right? So let's think about chapter 14 here. We have Jesus on Zion with his army. The next picture is the gospel. The next picture is this message. Babylon is fallen. It's fallen. That great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. All right, so who is Babylon? Let's just start with that. This one's kind of a bit complicated. There's several rich things here that are unexpected and maybe hard to tease out. So who is Babylon? Why do you think it's referring to Rome? How would it be a reference to Rome?
Because this is in the context of, like, obviously Rome is that the second beast or the earth beast that we were talking about, and we're talking about fighting that beast and the destruction of it. And this verse is talking about the fall of Babylon. So that's
Okay, all right. All right, so I do think it's referring to Rome, and like Jesse said, I mean that's where we are kind of in the context. We have the sea beast, which is the political national Roman Empire, if you will, and then we have this earth beast, which represents the false religion of Rome, the emperor worship that would have been help giving glory back to it. So we're in the context of that, so that makes sense. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we get into chapters 16 and 18. But I do want to notice a few characteristics here. First of all, he says that Babylon is that great city. All right, so we're not talking about an individual. We're talking about at least a city, possibly that representing something more. But I actually do think it is this city. So we see that it's she, so it's personified as a woman, and we've got precedents for this throughout Scripture, right? Proverbs personifies wisdom as a woman. We looked at extensively in previous lessons about how Israel and other nations, like Babylon, the original Babylon, was the capital cities were personified as women. And so is the group there. So it fits very well with that. And if you think of the original Babylon as being the captive nation that took God's people, and the people were there into captivity, and it oppressed them. That image as a nation, as a political thing, also fits well here, because what is Rome doing? It has God's people and it's persecuting them, and in some way you might think of it as captivity as well, as because of its oppressing them. So in this kind of way. So that also fits, but we're going to talk about that a little more. So a few other things to notice. She is made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is not something that you could say about, say, for example, Jerusalem or Judah or any other nation. This has got to be a worldwide force. Otherwise, this doesn't make any kind of sense. So, and then lastly, notice that she's using the wine of her fornication. And so she is using some kind of intoxicant to draw people in, to participate in her sin, which is ultimately going to lead to wrath. Wrath not only for her, but wrath for the other people that are going to partake in this. So just as a symbol, you think of Proverbs 23, 29 through 35, talks about the dangers of wine. Remember how don't look at it when it sparkles in the cup. It's that same idea as, oh, it looks really good. That looks like that would be great. And then afterwards, you're swinging from the crow's nest and, just dead to the world, and people are beating you up, and you just don't care. And all you can care about is, when can I have another? That's kind of the picture here. And Habakkuk 2, 14 through 15, also again of literal Babylon, pictures it as somebody who is trying to get somebody to drink. Here, have another drink, pressing the bottle to his mouth so that he can uncover his nakedness, so that he can take advantage of him and hurt his neighbor. So again, not the exact same picture, but the idea of somebody intoxicating, seducing somebody, encouraging somebody to drink so that they can take advantage of them in some way. So wine is often used in that way, and is dangerous in that way. So I think probably one of the best passages is that aligns to this is in Jeremiah 51, 6 to 10. There he says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon, and everyone save his life. Do not be cut off in her iniquity." All right, so this is a message for people that are in captivity and they have an opportunity to come out. He says, "For this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He shall recompense her. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations are deranged. Babylon has suddenly fallen and been destroyed. Wail for her, take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go every one to his own country, for her judgment reaches to heaven and is lifted up to the skies. The Lord has revealed our righteousness. Come and let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. So, thinking about her being this golden cup, God did establish all of the governments. He established them, as we talked about before, to perform a certain function in protecting all people, not just his people, but all people, and protecting what is right, and being a servant and an executioner, an avenger of evil. As we learn about in Romans 13 and Daniel 4, he talks about that as well, that God sets in power whomever he will to rule over the nations of men. So that's God's design, but again, as we said before, they have corrupted it. So just like Babylon was a tool, a weapon used by God, as he tells us in Habakkuk 1, in the same kind of way that the original Babylon twisted it through their idolatry, their arrogance, and became very cruel, Rome has done a very similar kind of thing. And just like the original Babylon, we see the devil is behind this force as well in twisting what God has done to use it for their own purposes. And I think, as I pointed out earlier in Habakkuk 2, this Babylon is using the same kind of technique to try to encourage other people to partake in their sin. So, how would Babylon have, and how would Rome have done that? How would they have seduced those people? It would have been through political kind of deals, right? If you do this for us and us, then we will give you this kind of money, this kind of resource, this kind of protection. And so they would have compelled them to be involved in either their sin, whether it was persecution or some other kind of sin, and for favors of being part of the Roman Empire. And we're going to see that message kind of emphasized more as we go. All right. So how about this part of the message? So going back to the same message again, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Okay, that's past tense. So how is he saying this in the past tense, since this was not at all true? It had not already fallen. That was still yet future.
Prophetic past tense.
Prophetic past tense. Explain that to me. What does that mean?
It's as good as done. So someone who knows the future can talk about it as if it has already happened.
Yes. Yes. And then they do that to emphasize the certainty of it, right? All right, very good. So you'll run across this in several places. I think one of the more clear ones is in Romans 4, 16 through 18, where talking about Abraham and the promises that were given to him, it says, as it is written, I have made you, again, notice, past tense, a father of many nations. And how many children did Abraham have at this time? He didn't have any, much less nations, but yet he is already at that time a father of many nations. In the presence of him who believed in God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. This is a very deliberate thing. Again, this is expressing the certainty. So who contrary to hope and hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. This is not someone who's like lost track of time. He understands this is still something that's future. So shall your descendants be. This is somebody who is emphasizing the fact that this is as good as already done. This is certain. And as Andrew said, this is something that only makes sense if we're talking about somebody who's eternal. That's the only person who can speak in this way. And from his vantage point, past tense is probably the best analogy to the way things would look to him. But all right, so a few other examples for you to think about. This is actually very old text. This is exactly what Isaiah said about the original Babylon. Here comes a chariot of men with a pair of horsemen. The idea is this is a message being brought to a watchman, to like a remote outpost. And here's the message. Babylon is fallen, and all the carved images of her gods he has broken to the ground. And then Jeremiah 52, declare among the nations, proclaim and set up a standard. Proclaim, do not conceal it. Say, Babylon is taken. Bel is shamed. Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are humiliated. Her images are broken in pieces. For out of the north a nation comes up against her, which shall make her land desolate, and no one shall dwell therein. So going back to our thinking of capitals and nations as women, notice it's her. Her idols have been broken. This is a woman who has lost her idols. So in this kind of grand analogy, the husband of a nation would be her God. So this is the most obvious scene in God's relationship with Israel in looking in books like Hosea. So her husband that she has taken has been broken, and now she sits as a widow. And so just a reference there to that. All right, so we've talked about Babylon. We've talked about the certainty of their judgment. Why were they being judged again? What can we learn about God's nature from this?
It was because she had caused the other nations to partake in her idolatry.
Yeah, exactly. We've touched on this before, but I just want to emphasize the fact that this is happening because she's made all these nations drink of this wine of her fornication. So this would have been a message that would have been very comforting to those. Again, think back to those saints saying, how long, how long? Why is this happening? This is something that God is going to do. And so it would be comforting to them to know that this is going to happen. This wrong is going to be made right, is going to be avenged. So it would also be instructive to those people who didn't understand why God was judging. And I think you also, as we said before, you see God's justice. It doesn't matter how big a city, an empire, it doesn't matter how much money it has or how much influence it has. If it doesn't repent, God's going to bring judgment, and he's not going to play favorites. And that's a pretty important lesson for us to think about at a national level. It doesn't matter what we call us, it matters what we do. And God is not going to play favorites with America or any other nation for that matter. So Jeremiah 50:14-15, put yourselves in array against Babylon all around. All you who bend the bow, shoot at her. Spare no arrows, for she has sinned against the Lord. Shout against her all around. She has given her hand. Her foundations have fallen. Her walls are thrown down, for it is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance on her as she has done, so do to her. And then Jeremiah 50:23-29, how the hammer of the whole earth has been cut apart and broken, how Babylon has become a desolation among the nations. Why has this happened? Because you have contended against the Lord. The Lord has opened his armory and brought out the weapons of his indignation. So he goes on to talk about the vengeance of the Lord our God, the vengeance of his temple. Again, call together the archers, repay her according to her work, according to all that she has done, do to her, for she has been proud against the Lord, against the Holy One of Israel. So we see not only the judgment, and we also see her sin, but this emphasizes also a measure of arrogance that we've actually been talking about. I mean, what is ultimately happening in this emperor worship? You have a man saying, I'm equal with God. Worship me, don't worship him. If you don't worship me, you want to stick with him, then I'm going to take your life. I'm going to bring judgment on you. So there's tremendous arrogance in exalting himself and in enforcing those terrible requirements. So this brings us to this next thought, the patience of the saints. This is the second time we've seen this phrase. In this case, what is the patience of the saints that's highlighted in this verse? And then how is this going to help them endure? How will this help them maintain patience?
I think you just mentioned how it should be comforting to them that this judgment is coming against those who are persecuting them. So just endure, and then everything will be made right.
All right, very good. So like we've seen before, there's really going to be two sides to this. There is both the judgment, the punishment, and the reward aspect, and you see both sides of this. So the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself also shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out in full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. and they have no rest day or night, who worships the beast in his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God in the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a loud voice from heaven saying to me, Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. So, this tremendous message of judgment and judgment extending into torment and eternal punishment that will go on and on forever. And this is one of the things that fear, that desire to avoid that, and the desire that even though one may give his life, one may have to die, and they may suffer a little bit of torment now, that's so much better than torment in eternity. And even though they may have a little bit of relief, I go to the market, I don't have the mark of the beast, however that is, I can't buy food today, I go home hungry. I would like to be able to satisfy myself and have a food for today versus the eternal bliss and joys of heaven. There's no comparison, but this is setting up very clearly this populating the scale, if you will, and helping us to make a decision. Do we choose this or do we choose that? And helping us to see that comparison that when we're put on the point is very difficult for us to see. So keeping this in mind is going to help us endure and help them maintain patience. And so I think it's a powerful thought to think about them. If this is what they could use to face the sword, then what can we do with this if we're facing much lesser temptations and much lesser trials? This is something we need to continually keep in front of us. All right, so worshiping the beast, receiving his mark, yeah, sure, it makes things a little easier now. You avoid physical hardship, economic hardship, but hell will be so much worse and it will last so much longer. And then on the other sides, you have the blessings that await, even if it's martyrdom. They will rest from their labors and they'll be rewarded for their works. So this would help them to endure. It would give them hope. All right, any other thoughts about this before we leave it? So one of the things I'd like for you to think about as we've been going, we're really building up a contrast. We're drawing a line. No, we're not doing it. God is doing it as he's describing both of these. So on one side, you have the devil, you have the dragon as he's introduced to us, and at the, if you will, the head of the organization on the other side is God himself sitting on the throne. But in both cases, we have them using, if you will, servants to kind of execute their will and to bring about their plan. Who is the devil using? He's using the sea beast. He's using the Roman Empire, this beast that has arisen out of the sea. Who is God using that's taking the stand on the opposite side? It's Jesus. All right? If we come on down, who was it that the sea beast brought in to help him? That was the earth beast. We're going to see him later called the false prophet. And who is again directing all glory, worship him, go back to him. Well, who have we seen doing that up to this point? Well, we go back to chapter 11, so we have to go back a little bit further, but still part of this big interlude, which also again says that this is one giant section that's connected together. We see these two witnesses that, remember, they ministered for that time until they were actually killed and then brought up into heaven. But they had a ministry and a gospel to proclaim. Now, we've identified the city of Rome, Babylon, the harlot, but up to this point, we've not talked about somebody on the other side. I mean, we kind of have, but we really haven't. So we'll need to develop that a little bit further. Now, who was the individuals that followed the beast? This would be the marked beast worshipers. On the other side, we have the Lamb and his army, the 144,000. So we have this organization with this structure, but then ultimately they have an army. They have a group of people that is pushing their will. On the other side, God's people are executing his will as well. They are also an army. And so on each level, we have these opposing and these contrasting sides. who in some ways are parallel, but obviously extremely different all at the same time. So the other thing that's kind of parallel but very different is this message. The beast is offering pleasure now versus God offering eternal bliss later. The beast is threatening. You may end up being persecuted, may end up giving your life. So you may be tormented for a little bit now, versus God saying, but if you don't listen to me, you will be tormented in eternity in hell. So very similar, opposing, opposite, but yet very similar kind of structure, if you will, on both sides. And so we have this choice that is before us, and it's one or the other. They're as opposite as they can be. So to me, this is helpful to think about and help us focus on making a choice, because this is the choice that is before us. All right, any other thoughts on this before we leave it? All right, so quickly, we've been talking about the Lamb, we've been talking about his army. What kind of weapons are they going to use? Let's connect the dots. What did we just talk about?
Using the gospel and the good news and the promise of judgment later.
That's right. So they're bringing a message, and their message has two elements. Judgment is coming. The harlot is going to fall. She has fallen. And then the other message is there's eternal bliss. There is a reward that is waiting. These are the weapons of this army. This is how that army is going to fight. This is not going to be a physical battle. This is going to be a spiritual battle. All right. So with that in mind, let's go into this last part, harvesting the earth. So we're introduced to a rider on a cloud who sticks their sickle into the earth and reaps the earth. Who is this?
Who's one like the Son of Man?
Yeah, and who's the only person who's ever described in that way?
Christ.
Yeah. So I think this is most clearly a reference to Christ. There are a few prophets that are also emphasizes their humanity, but again, going back to Daniel 7, as well as what we've seen already in the book, I think this is clearly a reference to Jesus. So then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he sat on the cloud, thrust in the sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So, like I said, a reference back to Daniel 7, also the reference back to the cloud as well. Remember, this is how Jesus is going to come again, we're told in Acts 1. And then he promised to come in judgment to the Sanhedrin in Matthew 24:30, so that they would see it with their own eyes. So, again, Matthew 26:64, about him coming on the clouds of heaven, seated at the right hand of power. The interesting thing is did Jesus actually come in the destruction of Jerusalem personally? Could they actually see him sitting on a cloud? No. He was using Rome, again, ironically, as a tool here of judgment upon his own people. But that was him working through them to bring that judgment. And so I think in a very similar way, what we're seeing here is Jesus acting through his army, if you will, through his servants, reaping the world and converting them through the gospel, even though he may have not been physically present himself. So, so little time. So the other piece of it is I think there's also an emphasis that there is a timing aspect of this, and there's a matter of trying to get the timing right. And this is something that is in God's control, but he wants to make sure these people are saved. Well, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what is being gleaned? We're introduced now to a second harvest. What is being gleaned in the second harvest? And really the important question is this the same thing, just kind of shown a little bit differently?
The grapes of the earth, it says in verse 18, and the grapes are put into the winepress of the wrath of God, and so
Yes.
those are reserved for judgment.
All right, so we have two opposite harvests that are occurring here, right? We have one where the gospel is reaping those to be saved. It's separating those out. And then the other is after that occurs, now we have the harvest for destruction. So another angel comes out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle, and another angel came out from the altar who had power over fire. Again, notice the reference to judgment here. And he cried with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. All right, so this is obviously destruction and judgment that is having, where the first one we looked at was actually for redemption, for salvation. So I think in one way this is kind of similar again to what we saw in chapter 7. God recognizes a distinction. He's going to save those that are his and bring judgment or those. But again, connecting the dots, going back to the other visions that we looked at. We've seen Christ and his army. What weapons are they going to use? They're going to use these messages. This is what they're going to proclaim. This is what they're going to live. This is how they're going to survive. This is their hope. And so now, how are these weapons, how is this army, how are they going to act? There's going to be a reaping of the earth. There's going to be saving those who can be saved. But then after that happens, there will be destruction that follows. God's not going to lose anybody. If there was somebody that could have been saved out of Rome, he's not going to miss that opportunity. So I think this goes to answering the question that we looked at before, like how long? Why is this happening? Because these things have to happen first. All right. I don't have time to go through this. So we'll pick up with chapter 11 next time and talk about the significance of these symbols, and then we'll get into chapter 15. Thank you all. Appreciate your time very much.